Welcome back. All right, let's take you back to the story now. 4 convicted serial killers are currently looking to be released on parole. Between them, the 4 are responsible for the deaths of more than 100 people. Now, Stuart Wilkin, labelled as one of the most dangerous, is a cannibal who's killed and raped men and women as well as children. Cedric Make was given a life sentence for each of his 27 murders. He was convicted for other crimes too. Now, Nasrec serial killer Lazarus Mazingane was 27 years old in 2002 when he was convicted. He hunted women in the malls and streets of Johannesburg. Christopher Zigote murdered and raped 18 people in total by the time he was arrested in the 1990s rather. Now, can these violent criminals be rehabilitated and integrated back into society? Let's bring in investigative forensic investigator Gerard Labuschagne to give us what he thinks in terms of his idea. I mean, listening to me talk about all of this, I'm imagining the viewer is horrified at all the content that I'm giving them, describing these different serial killers. Do you think they can be rehabilitated and brought back into society? Will society even accept them?
No, thanks very much for the opportunity. And just to put into context, I spent 14.5 years investigating serial murderers when I was in the police. I've interviewed countless serial murderers as part of my master's and my doctorate as a psychologist. I was interviewing serial murderers. So I don't just speak from a point of emotion, but the short answer to your question, not be releasing these individuals back into society. Essentially, we don't know why they became serial murderers, so how do we fix that? And I think we have a very high estimate of correctional services if we think they will magically know how to fix serial murderers. And the thing is that, we can't judge their readiness to be released based on how well they performed in prison, because typically they're model prisoners. They learn, they study, they teach others, they get a little job that keeps them busy, but they're also not exposed to their victims while in prison. They're not exposed to the life stresses that contribute towards them going down that pathway to commit their next murder.
So basically you're saying they should stay in there because a person like that, we cannot be sure, will not come out and murder people again.
Absolutely. And I always say we're giving them a second chance, but we're giving a victim a first chance at being raped and murdered. And quite frankly, if that did happen, would we be surprised? We'd have to be idiots if we're surprised by that. So I think it's really irresponsible. In general, correctional services, I don't see them as a rehabilitative organization, let alone with something so specialized. So it's a huge chance we're taking. But we also have to keep in mind, you mentioned Cedric Make, 27 murders, 27 lives.
Yeah.
All those sentences start day 1. So he'll get to that parole point at the same time, whether he had committed 1 murder and got a life sentence or whether he's committed to 27. So we must also not forget that this is also about punishment. And if we let people out the first opportunity they qualify for a parole at whatever point in time that is, we're essentially saying to criminals, if you're going to commit murders or big crimes, go large, because you're only going to be punished effectively once because of how our sort of system works. And if you've killed 27 people, should you really be allowed out ever, just from a purely punishment point of view? And we keep in mind that when a court sentences someone, the court weighs up certain factors. They've got to weigh up the deterrence that person won't do it again, but the deterrence that you and I will crime, because we see what happened to that individual. It's punishment, it's retribution, it's how prevalent is this crime in society. It's taking into account the offender, their own circumstances, and their rehabilitation prospects. They take all of that into account when they decide to give a particular sentence. The parole board really just looks at, does this person show remorse and have they been well behaved in the past few years? They're really, in my opinion, behind the courts, because they're not taking into account the other aspects that the court took into account when they actually gave an individual a particular length of sentence.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at one of these serial killers, he used to even eat his victims, you know what I mean? And you talk about sitting down and speaking to serial killers in your career. Have they even understood why they did or do what they did?
No, most
because
of them
earlier you were saying,
Sorry, most people give a very superficial response, like I'm angry with women, or it's how what happened to me as a child. But, countless other people have those same complaints, but they're not killing or hurting anybody, let alone, killing them. You mentioned Stuart Wilkin. I actually spent time when I was in the police interviewing Stuart Wilkin, so I know him and his case intimately. You have a person who was killing his own daughter, his girlfriend's son, strangers, street children, workers, young boys on the street. as I said, raping, sadistically killing them. He was classified as a psychopath because he had targeted child victims. We're talking about a paedophile. There was necrophilia because he had sex with dead bodies. There was cannibalism in one instance. Could not add more things onto this person's plate to make him a dangerous individual. And they are considering releasing this individual. And I'm sure he doesn't quite understand himself why he did it, but unfortunately, that's not the point. The point is we have to protect society. And to release somebody like that, no matter how wonderful they've behaved in prison, is not the benchmark.
Especially if you bring them back into society where we have so many problems, they might be triggered to do what they did, especially because they too can't even explain it, right?
Absolutely, and their life is not going to be easier now. I mean, if their lives were difficult for various challenges at the times that they were committing these crimes, whether it be work-wise, relationship-wise, etc., I guarantee you, after coming out of prison, it's going to be a hell of a lot more difficult for them in terms of relationships, in terms of work opportunities. They're going to be faced by far more stressors than before. So I really can't see how it's a responsible thing to let these individuals out. It's unfair on them in some way, although I'm sure they won't see it that way. But it's absolutely unfair on society. And it comes back to the question, if you've killed that amount of people, are you actually finished being punished for what you've done?
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Labuschagne, for speaking to us. So we are not wrong as society, or those in society are not wrong in being outraged at that possibility.